Hello everyone, and welcome to yet another day in this, the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only getting worse before they get better. And today we are going through a Roger Hallam speech called How to Change Your Mindset to Collective Action. And the reason that I'm going through this is because it appears that an awful lot of left-wing activists, unsurprisingly I should say, seem to be constantly in talks as to what their next talking point should be. Because this speech has been very similar to what Grace Blakeley, as I have been covering her in some recent videos, has been saying as well. That, it's a classic left-wing thing of, we need collective action. No one really knows what it means, and people seem to have a hard time trying to explain it. But Roger Hallam has actually done, I believe, a PhD in political action and civil disobedience. So honestly, if you're going to listen to this from anyone, Roger Hallam is probably the person to do so. So his speech is half an hour long, but I'm just going to pick out the more interesting bits. In the meantime, put this on in the background, do something else, and please listen. I think that this is genuinely quite important. So take it away, Mr. Hallam.
So what I'm going to suggest is two things are on the cards, which are inevitable. The first thing that's inevitable is massive social disruption. And the second thing that's inevitable is there's going to be a pro-social response to that, or there's going to be fascism.
So yeah, this is Roger Hallam's recent brainwave, because Roger Hallam tried to make an organic farm between like 2011 and 2017, something like that. He was running it for a few years, and then it failed. It was one of the only farms in South Wales that failed, and he blamed it on quote-unquote extreme weather events. How there were extreme weather events in South Wales that only affected his farm is beyond anyone's expertise. However, due to this is why he has become a climate cultist, because he is a god-awful organic farmer. But as he has realised that people simply aren't believing the climate cultism, he has had to change up his tactics as to his scaremongering, and it's less now your kids are going to die from burning to the sun, and it's now your wives and daughters are going to get raped and killed by roaming gangs after the collapse of civilization due to the climate crisis. And don't worry, when people realise that that is also nonsense, he'll change his tune again. The whole point of Roger Hallam isn't to save the planet, it is to act retribution upon people he blames for his, quite frankly, substandard life. I mean, I say it's substandard, the guy's probably a millionaire, but he obviously doesn't feel particularly fulfilled, and that is why he is effectively LARPing as Lenin. And you are going to quite easily see what I mean as this speech continues.
So the real issue is not carbon emissions, the real issue is fascism.
Yeah, so classic scaremongering stuff. Honestly, the mythology of 20th century history has been a disaster for the human race. Fascism is not popular. Fascism effectively doesn't really exist, especially in the mainstream politics of our time. Fascism really is just saved for some of the most pathetic corners of the internet where nobody really pays attention. It's literally such an isolated ideology that, yeah, fine, a few people on Twitter and YouTube can get 50,000 followers. And trust me, in the very unlikely scenario of societal collapse, they will not be the people rising up from the ashes of civilization telling us all how to live. But of course, Roger Hallam isn't referring to unironic fascism. He basically just means how the Tories are now. Because people like Roger Hallam believe that deporting people is fascism because the Nazis tried to do it by deporting people to concentration camps. Because Roger Hallam is completely mental, and once again, this is why you should not trust anyone with a PhD as soon as they start talking nonsense, because all they have done in that PhD is try and rationalise their absolutely ridiculous intuition and opinions. They haven't actually tried to challenge their own beliefs, they have just done what they can to try and reinforce it.
Right? That's actually how it's going to manifest itself in the next 20 years. And everyone's got an idea, about that. What's happened to the Tory party, what's happening in Holland and Italy and blah, 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 right? And we know it's extremely unpleasant.
I mean, those images are probably going to get this video demonetised, but whatever, the true fans give me money on streams. But yes, just to labour the point, this is Roger Hallam's prediction, and he kind of has to hope that this in any way is actually plausible, otherwise his ideas for collective action are never going to take place. Because the only people actually scared about the rise of fascism are effectively low IQ leftists. There is no midwit alive that genuinely thinks that the rise of fascism is actually happening. They just say it for rhetoric. And this is exactly what Roger Hallam is doing. He doesn't believe there's going to be a second rise of the Nazis. He doesn't believe that the Tory party is actually full of Nazis. It is a way to signal to people that these people that I don't like and you don't like are actually worse than you think, therefore you should do what I tell you to do. And as you can see from Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil, it works. Like, what do we do? Arrest them, obviously. Should they commit crimes? And Roger Hallam has been arrested and put in jail. Has it taught him his lesson? No. So he should probably go back.
You might be thinking, oh, like Roger's coming to say some nice things about collectivism, and then you can sort of go, oh, let's do a bit of collectivism or something.
That is typically exactly how these talks go down, yes.
So basically, that's wrong, right? I'm here to say collectivism is happening anyway, right?
I mean, I have a really, really bad feeling that Roger Hallam is going to try and conflate collectivism with partaking in a group activity, such as the mass protests of Extinction Rebellion, which isn't what collectivism means. Collectivism is a way of applying the law. And it is true, collectivism is happening anyway. This is why we have hate speech laws, and this is why we have the Equality Act. Like, we do have collectivism in the law, and that's the sort of things that I am an activist for trying to get rid of. As I say, I don't think Roger Hallam is actually going to try and put forward the idea that that is collectivism in action. I think he's going to try and say the classic, we're all atomised individuals, this idea is constantly pushed, which I don't even buy, as I went through with the Grace Blakely video. And the idea of that is to divide and conquer. We can't do much as an individual stick, but as Martin Prince says,
but as a bundle we form a mighty faggot.
It's going to be happening anyway, because when a society gets into social stress, it's collectivism that takes over.
This is correct, but I really need him to specify what he means here, because I'm still not sure what he means by collectivism. But it is true that in times of crisis, an awful lot of governments will start leaning on collectivism because it effectively simplifies everything. And individualism is certainly only something that you can actually push when you are in a state of stability. What happened in 1800s Victorian Britain? Oh, we had hyper-individualism. Why was that? Because we were world hegemon and we weren't really involved so much in major wars in Europe. We were still involved in wars, but certainly not to the extent that we were involved in them when it came to fighting Napoleon. And instead we could focus our efforts on, doing things like ending slavery and massively improving living standards for Britain.
So the issue is it going to be fascist collectivism or is it going to be pro-social collectivism, right?
See, at the end of the day, I am still massively an individualist because I think Carl recently said that individualism is basically just English culture or British culture. It's collectivism for the Brits is effectively what individualism is. And what Roger Hallam has just signalled to me there is, oh, do you want the bad form of collectivism? Or do you want my form of collectivism, which to basically everyone apart from Roger Hallam will be still bad collectivism? Because as we see from every collectivist society, no matter how noble their intentions, the elites of that collective society get everything and everyone else just becomes poorer. There are so many examples of this happening to socialist and communist countries, I can't even be bothered to reference them properly.
Collectivism has this image of the gulag. That's not what I'm going to be talking about.
I love the phrasing there. It's like, oh, when people say collectivism, they think concentration camps and gulags, but I'm not going to be talking about that. He doesn't say that he doesn't want them, though, which I'm sure in public he would say he doesn't want them. However, I think if you were to directly ask him, and in fact, now that I think about it, he has actually answered this question before, what do you do with, say, Tory MPs at this time? And he has openly said he will put them on trial. He is open about putting them in gulags. Roger Hallam is pretty atrocious at saying the quiet part quiet. And again, he's let his mask slip here. He is open. He is fine with gulags. And he is assuring people in that room that they will not be put in the gulags. But hey, as a lot of online righties like to say, and an awful lot of socialists as well, ooh, Stalin and Lenin killed a load of communists. And it's like, yeah, this is the problem with collectivism. This is why the British don't particularly like it and will definitely be put off by your brand of it as well. I mean, I say this, but 1984 becomes a reality every day.
What my definition of collectivism is like increased social connectivity.
It's one of my favourite things that leftists do. When they do finally get round to defining their terms, they use absolutely nonsense language that in no way simplifies their point. Again, I use the example all the time, but whenever I bring up the word woke, I will always give about 3 separate definitions that effectively mean the same thing, just so you know what I'm talking about. That's why I say intersectionality, postmodern neo-Marxism, or diversity and inclusion. 3 separate things that if you don't understand 1 or 2 of them, you should at least understand the 3rd one. Whereas saying collectivism to me is increased social connectivity, like what the hell is he talking about? We already have social media.
Sounds a bit nicer, but that's a bit university-ish, isn't it? So, another definition is people come together for the common good.
If you know that first definition is complete jargon, why even say it? Well, I can actually answer that question. It's pure midwittery. What an awful lot of midwits do is use jargon to signal that they are in the know. Here is what the cool kids on universities say. I'm going to try and say it too. And by cool kids, I effectively mean some of the lecturers in the humanities. The ones who made it their life work to effectively take over the universities and push the ridiculous agendas. As I say, when I was at university, even the chemistry department was starting to put out flyers about women in science and just making stuff up about them. But on the point of people coming together for the common good, I mean, again, you don't need a collective society to do that. The Brits put themselves into 2 centuries of debt to end the transatlantic slave trade.
In other words, it's not about me, it's about everyone in this room coming together and saying, okay, what are we going to do together? Because what we do together is a lot more important than what we're doing individually.
I have no idea how bonked your ideas have to be to have to basically explain over and over again that making a protest group is a good idea. Like, the fact you have to explain to a protest group that a protest group is a good idea, to me, it says to me that you basically have nothing else of value to say. Like, obviously, like, this is just the sort of self-evident thing that just should never need explaining. I don't think I've ever had to explain to people that working together as a group tends to yield better results when it comes to advocating for political change. The Wellington Project, for God's sake, we never had to explain to people that us coming together is a good idea. That was just known. What we did have to explain is what we would like to see from British society. However, for some reason, Roger Hallam is having to explain to a protest group why it's a good idea to come together as a protest group.
Usually, if I do a talk, I've got a plan of what you're going to do. But there isn't a plan for what you're going to do, not because I've suddenly gone all intellectual on you, but because it's still being worked out.
One of my biggest gripes with leftism, and I do not understand how people find it so profound, but what Roger Hallam is effectively saying here over and over again is organise, 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 organise. As I went through with Grace Blakely, that's all they can really say. We had it with Second Thought last week. What did he say? Oh, organise, join a trade union, join a socialist group or something. And all Roger Hallam's saying here is, again, I can put this in such fewer words, it's embarrassing. He's basically saying your ideals and your preferred outcomes and the way you get to those outcomes are going to be ever-changing and evolving. Therefore, you never actually have a strict plan. It's like, yeah, obviously, but you have overarching goals and overarching ideas of how to actually get to those goals. Again, why do these things need to be explained? Maybe it's just because I've been so involved in these things for about 5 years. I just find it surprising that anyone even thinking about joining these protest groups need to have it explained to them why it's a good thing. Implicitly, they already know it's a good thing by being at this meeting. Why does that need to be explained?
But there is like a massive change, I would suggest, which is sort of exciting, amongst the climate and radical spaces around the Western world, right? From this individualist orientation, which we've had for the last 30 years, into this collectivist orientation.
I mean, is Roger Hallam kidding anyone here? Everyone knows Greenpeace quickly turned into a quasi-socialist organisation. It's basically a meme, and has been if you watch any sort of cartoon or media over the past 50 years, let alone 30, that these types of people were effectively the lazy, weed-smoking socialist types. Like, even I, when I was at school, was learning about Greenpeace, and even I know that all the new current climate activist groups, Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, any of their offshoots, are all effectively aiming for the same thing that Greenpeace was, which didn't really have much to do with the environment, but a hell of a lot more for trying to lobby and commit to direct action for the ends of stopping hyper-individualist capitalism or whatever. Christian Niemitz of the IEA has a law called Niemitz's Law, which effectively says any left-wing group will eventually have to amalgamate all other left-wing causes into itself. That's why you've seen Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil start talking about Palestine. That's why when people have been arrested on migrant coach protests, stopping coaches moving migrants to different detention centres, it turns out that the ringleaders have been involved in Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, and other left-wing protest groups. It's because, frankly, it's not coherent, and they're not trying to be coherent aside from, I want to do the opposite of what the Tories seem to want to do. And how do they get fed that information? Well, from academia and the media. What the Tories actually do is completely different to the way they are portrayed within media and universities and studies and Twitter and things like that. Again, it has to be mentioned over and over again, but everyone seems to think that that the Tories are this completely anti-immigration, put them all in detention centres and send them to a Rwanda crazy Nazi party, when in reality we have literally never, ever seen as much immigration as we have seen in the past 5 years. Again, the statistics speak for themselves. We had more immigration between 1997 and today than we had from 1066 to 1997. It is unprecedented, and yet everyone thinks that this is low immigration numbers that we're seeing. Absolutely mental. And obviously Roger Hallam is completely fine with immigration until it comes to, there'll be climate refugees though, therefore I need to get the right wing on board and say that's bad.
And there's variations on the theme, but there's a big shift happening. And maybe it's because it's triggered by the realisation it is going to happen now.
Well, as I mentioned before, every 6 months or so, Roger Hallam has to change his tune as to what the actual effects of the climate crisis are going to be, because telling people sea level rises were going to happen didn't work. Telling people that we're going to be experiencing non-stop drought didn't work. Therefore, he's had to move on to roaming gangs of fascists are going to kill you to try and convince people that bad things are going to happen. So, as I say, even Roger Hallam doesn't believe this nonsense.
No disrespect, but you're all embedded. What I mean by embedded is you think, oh no, I'm not a bourgeois individualist. But you are, no disrespect, right? Because you swim in a cultural sea which basically makes you think of things which are bourgeois individualism.
Again, he's not going to open up gulags. He just really hates bourgeois individualists and wants them in gulags. I mean, honestly, we really do need to get to a point where anyone who uses the term bourgeois or proletariat needs to just be shamed out of political discourse, because Marxism is such a shamelessly wrong and embarrassing ideology that the fact that it is still seen as a serious political thought and ideology, it's just frankly embarrassing, as I say. It's purely for envious midwits. It's all just window dressing at this point for people to enact retribution. And as I say, that's what Roger Hallam wants, because he blames the fact that he is a garbage organic farmer on the fact that people drive cars.
Right? We're saturated, and you're in that sea, and you can't get beyond that sea because it's all around us. So that's a big challenge for us. And we need leadership and imagination and a bunch of other things I'm going to talk about to get out of that sea and actually see what most people in human history have, how they've seen themselves, which is totally different to how we see ourselves.
Again, this is another classic leftist mindset problem of the Rousseauian assumption of the state of nature, where effectively people were just bears, would barely talk to each other, but be fairly content and happy with just walking around forests, hunting and gathering by themselves. Once in a while, they'd see a person of the opposite sex and procreate, and effectively the woman would be stuck with the babies for 18 years while the man goes off and enjoys his life. Which I know is quite an ironic worldview when it comes to constantly going on about collectivism. But one thing I've learned after literally years of doing nothing but listen to leftists and talk about their ridiculous position is that, yes, they don't have very coherent thoughts, and Roger Hallam is a great example of that. But yes, people in the past, again, when you think of individualism, you've got to think of it less of it as everyone needs to think of themselves as nothing more than, their own units, their own self-interest and things like that. And in reality, what individualism was what can you actually do for your local community, your family, or your country? What is your duty to England, say? And the thing is that Roger Hallam is effectively trying to use the same line here. There's no way you can say we need leadership and refer to other people as the leadership unless you yourself are an individualist. You can't do it. Lenin, for example, when he was writing his What Do We Do pamphlets, he would always say, yeah, we need leadership, but effectively what he meant by that is, I need people that can control the proles by doing what I say they should do. That's what he means. And to be fair, this is probably what Roger Hallam means here as well. However, I think even Roger Hallam would admit that he is in this sea of individualism as well and can't exactly escape it, and he doesn't really want to say, I want leaders that will basically just follow me anyway, but give me about, 100 people or so who are following them for the cause. But as I say, he's bad at saying the quiet part quiet. So as he goes on, he is probably going to let that mask slip again.
So one way of concretising this, I suppose, is if we go back 200 years, there's a whole load of traditions which, whether we know it or not, we're connected with historically, that have been collectivist.
In 1824, I would like to know what the hell he's going to be referring to here, because the mid to late 18th century was when individualism really took over Britain, and where our living standards started getting radically increased.
Particularly before 1989.
200 years ago, we had collective groups. And then he says, particularly before 1989. Did he mean 100 years ago? When we went through World War II and every Keynesian in charge decided this was a good idea, we need to carry on with this. We just don't apply the Keynesianism to the war machine. We apply it to healthcare systems and things like that. And it has just ended up with nothing but stagnation, constant strikes, and 2/3 of the public money being spent directly on redistribution of wealth.
And then, geographically, as it were, there's a whole load of cultures that we're vaguely aware of, which were collectivist as well, which organised themselves in a totally different way.
I need examples, man. Yeah, collectivist societies have existed all over the world and have existed in Britain in the past as well. Yes, correct. The Bill of Rights in the late 17th century was technically collectivist because it only allowed Protestants to be armed, whereas as Catholics were not allowed to own any arms, because to be fair, we did cause trouble in the past.
And if you know the work of David Graeber, everyone knows David Graeber, do you? He's a cool guy.
I do love how Roger Hallam had to ask his audience, oh, everyone knows David Graeber, don't they? And then obviously people in the audience just didn't know who he was. Because why would anyone know who the Professor Emeritus of Horticultural Science at University of South Dakota is? Like, yeah, maybe if you're a green fanatic you might know him, but I would not be shocked if most people are at that talk because they are of a slightly older generation with not an awful lot to do, but they know they're slightly left-wing and want to feel like they're doing something for their grandkids.
So, he spent his whole life trying to say to people, we can choose to live differently, right? We are not deterministically having to live in a capitalistic society.
Yeah, sure, but as I always like to go to, revealed preference shows that people absolutely prefer capitalistic societies. You have a load of Cubans in Florida for a reason.
So individualist activism is the idea that I become an activist, and in the same way as you sort of choose oranges at the supermarket. You see what I mean? It's like, what am I doing this week? I'm going to be an activist. Oh, what's your New Year's resolution? I'm going to try activism. You see, I'm going to try it, and if I don't like it, I'll try something else.
So according to Roger Hallam, individualism is when you as an individual decide that you're going to try things and see if they're for you. Effectively what Roger Hallam is saying here is that LARPing is cringe.
In other words, like, it's a transactional, possessive thing.
Oh my god, honestly, socialists always go on about how everything needs to be commodified. And then Roger Hallam instantly says that people trying new things is in of itself a commodity. Like, oh my god. I can see why every single one of his new founded climate cultist groups keep failing. It's because he effectively has to keep treating people like children.
The other element of individualist activism is, here's me and my little world, my me world, and over there is activism. And every now and again, I do a bit of activism. You know, it's the sort of hobby orientation, you know. Thursday night, I do my activism. The rest of the time, I'm living my real life. You know, I'm making sure I've got money and status.
So from what I can understand here, Roger Hallam wants activism to effectively become people's jobs. And that has actually been the case for quite a few people when it comes to Just Stop Oil. The pink-haired woman who threw the tomato soup onto the glass covering the Vincent van Gogh works is one person who comes to mind, and she's ended up on panels, and it turns out that she's just a screeching harpy who doesn't really know many things. And I think that's the issue that Roger Hallam keeps running into, because he's not actually very good at putting forward the actual points. He just tells these people the planet's going to burn and everyone's going to turn into a fascist. He's not actually giving people who go to his groups the actual necessary arguments and even debate tactics to put forward and try and change hearts and minds to get them on board. Instead, as I say, everyone kind of knows that you have to be a pretty cringe leftist to even think about taking Just Stop Oil seriously. And unfortunately, he's doing the exact same thing here. He is basically saying, oh my god, you are really cringe if you care about paying the bills and you do a bit of activism on the side. No, he is going to say, basically, you need to make it your full-time job. That is what he's going to say. I guarantee it.
Then the other element of individualist activism is...
Oh my god, how do you have three separate ways of saying individualists are cringe?
I'm an activist, but in 2 years, I'll be a banker. You know that routine?
Man, ContraPoints was really right when she said these people just don't want power. All they want to do is be in a position where they can constantly criticise it. Roger Hallam does nothing but become a manufacturer of mass hysteria. Because actually getting anything done is cringe, because it might get you money or status. It's amazing. Again, Roger Hallam's probably a millionaire. But like with most collectivists, it's not cringe when they're the individualist.
And the collectivist activism might be summed up as, I'm in this for life.
Yeah, see what I mean? Being an activist needs to be your job. That's how you become collectivist. If you have a job, you're an individualist. But if you're an activist as your job, that's not cringe. It's quite amazing. This man has a PhD, I want to remind you, or at least was studying for one. Again, don't take these people seriously. Not everyone who takes a PhD is cringe, that's not what I mean, but people that obviously just take a PhD to become lifelong activists. You know, these totally not individualist millionaire activists. Don't take them seriously, ever. Because all they want is to feel some meaning in their empty lives, and apparently the way they do that is by constantly doing things that keep leaving them with these senses of emptiness.
That's the orientation of people historically, right? In other words, it's not a thing that I add on to me. It is me.
So, friend of the channel, Pose Law, made this comic probably a few years ago now, I can't remember. But effectively, what Roger Hallam is saying is that he wants to get straight to the fourth panel. You know, you've made it as an activist. Obviously, in this case, it's being an activist in terms of having a family. But obviously, you have Roger Hallam here in the background saying LARP, LARP, LARP. And the thing is that he's already made it here, but he still feels like the man in the background on the bench. Because his idea of making it is being the ginger father here, having fathered a good and proper actual activist class that is under his leadership. But he's obviously not making it, and he's obviously not making it because he's still making speeches having to explain to people that you need to be an activist for life. As if that's not obvious anyway. Again, if you're having to explain this to people, you've got the wrong audience. You need to have people who want to be activists for life. And this is why they're recruiting universities, by the way, because trust me, I know this for a fact because this was me at university. A lot of people don't really know what to do because you're effectively kept in a perpetual state of childhood until you're 21 if you go to uni, because you effectively are not getting proper life lessons from going to university. And man, I still remember being like 20 and people still would not enter into tutorial rooms unless the lecturer was there, unless the tutor was there, which is something I just simply could not imagine being like now. But if you want to form and mould minds, that is the absolute perfect way to do it. But I would also love to know what type of people he can even cite that were lifelong activists. Even philanthropists, who were people who had so much money they basically just wanted to make massive charitable endeavours. That was just a part-time thing. You know, most of the time they were still running businesses and making money, but when they had so much of it, they thought, well, I'll spend it to help the more needy, you know, make hospitals in Bristol thanks to Colston, or fund poorhouses and things like that. And this is why so many things are named after people from the 18th and 19th century, because that's what they did. You know, Glasgow had a load of tobacco industry tycoons who would spend their money back in Glasgow to help the city of Glasgow. The first person who comes to mind when it comes to lifelong activists, you know, back in the day, I guess we can say, was William Wilberforce in the late 18th to early 19th century. Effectively, he could become a lifelong activist because he effectively was born into money and inherited it all, and then became a lifelong politician, again, because he had £8,000 at the time to purchase the votes, which is how things worked at the time, you know, whatever. And then he applied his life to being a political activist the whole time. How do you do that? Already be rich? Yeah, this is the problem, Roger. Not everyone is already rich like you. You know, people aren't typically going to work to gain more money and status. They're doing it to pay basic bills. And that is especially going to be true of the students that you have decided to bring on board. Eventually they're going to realise, oh, I'm not really making any money by constantly throwing paint on buildings. I'm probably going to need some sort of income at some point, whereas at least your elderly OAPs are doing a pretty good job of being able to be relatively financially independent because I'm paying for their pension.
Usual historical example of this is socialists in the 20th century or communists in the 20th century. Now, I'm not saying these good or bad people or whatever, you know, that's another issue. But I'm saying, in terms of their psychological makeup, these are people who were going this capitalism is going to kill us, and I'm going to spend my whole life going against it.
Yeah, how many people in those marches were actually people that could do that? Because I'm telling you now, it wasn't very many. It was the leaders generally that could do it. Again, Karl Marx, another great example. How did he manage to be a lifelong activist? Because his entire life was constantly subsidised by Friedrich Engels. How did he make all his money? From owning a factory and having people work for him, despite the fact that communism was supposed to stop that. And again, by the way, Engels' father was already the person who made that a success and effectively allowed them to literally be the fat cat capitalists that are in all the memes, because that is effectively what could happen in the 19th century, sorry. And I'm not being funny, but pretty much every journalist is actually a full-time activist at this point. And how are most of them, especially the younger ones, managing to do that? Subsidised from their parents. Some things genuinely never change.
That's what I do. I am a socialist, you see what I mean? And it goes to my core. And if I have to fight for it, so be it. And if I have to die for it, so be it. See what I mean? That's what most people historically understand as activism.
People understand that now. The problem with your modern activists is that they're all screaming about things that obviously aren't true. Like, they're screaming about things that these same socialists were screaming about 100 years ago, as you say. Oh, capitalism is evil and killing us all. No, it has been the single most effective way of raising all our living standards and allowing people to live and prosper. As I constantly say, the issue we have at the moment is a complete lack of capitalism, a complete lack of support and ability for small or medium businesses to actually grow. We're effectively slowly moving into the cyberpunk world of corporations owning everything, because they can lobby the government to have the type of legislation that they want and regulation that they want to stop small and medium businesses from succeeding. Why do they all get on board with this green stuff, guess what? It's not because your activism is working, it's because they know it will end up costing smaller businesses so much that they can't actually succeed. You know, smaller energy companies in Britain, some have been taxed like 113%. In fact, I'm going to find the article. So this is from an article about energy companies deciding that North Sea oil probably isn't going to be worth drilling because our tax rates are so high, because we have decided that fossil fuels are just the devil. One main support measure requested has been for a pause in the recently implemented windfall levy or tax, which has left oil and gas companies seeing their profits taxed as much as 75%. Which is why I absolutely hate when people say, oh, look at Shell and BP, they made billions of profit, because they're both worldwide companies that are profiting off giving people what they want at a margin of something like 2% or something like that. Thin margins because it is a high demand commodity that they are trying to supply as well as they can. Some companies such as EnQuest have been taxed as high as 113% due to the tax being ring-fenced and only concerning oil and gas extraction profits and not taking into account other costs in various other departments. EnQuest said in a report, as expected, the windfall levy has impacted access to capital across the sector, with the most significant on EnQuest being the reduced borrowing base within the group's reserve bank lending facility. Clearly, a volatile fiscal regime imposes significant challenges, but any business and the extension of the levy to 2029, announced in the spring budget, represented the fourth amendment to the UK sector taxation in the last 2 years. Again, EnQuest, not one of these massive companies like Shell or BP that everyone's heard about. No, a smaller, probably medium-sized one. In fact, I'm going to put a little bit of effort into this. EnQuest is an independent UK-based petroleum exploration and production company which operates mainly in the UK continental shelf. EnQuest shares are included on the main list of London Stock Exchange, and the firm holds a secondary listing on Nasdaq OMX Stockholm, and it has interests in 6 oil fields located in the northern North Sea. Blah, 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 blah. Point being, yes, this is a medium-sized company. It's still massive, don't get me wrong, but in terms of energy companies, this is certainly on the smaller side, and they're being taxed into oblivion because they don't have the advantage of Shell and BP lobbying that can lobby their competition out of the water, essentially. Being taxed over 100% should obviously never happen, but no doubt Roger Hallam will be happy with this sort of thing happening, because the less oil and gas companies, the better, I imagine.
Right? We're not the centre of the universe. We're a little outlier, a temporary outlier, right? Before everyone goes back to what it is normally, which is a matter of who you are and what you are for your life, because that's how serious it is.
I do find it absolutely amazing that effectively what collectivist activism basically means is you have to give your life for the cause, which I just can't ever imagine doing that for political positions. I would never die for a political position. Probably because I have far too much more important going on in my life. I would give my life for my family. I would give my life for my country. But for a political position, no. These ideologies and these ideas, they transcend space and time. You know, they are the sort of thing that are going to be worked out as time goes on. But what is here and now is worth defending. You know, my own family, my own country, they need to be defended so that in the future, to all my ancestors, whom I hope I have anyway, I need kids first, will be able to enjoy a standard of life that I have and maybe better. Now, obviously politics comes into that some way, that's why I make YouTube videos and do some activism, but mainly what I care about is providing for my family and improving the country in any little way I can, even if it's just picking up litter, because I don't care what all these collectivists say. It would be ridiculous to apply your entire life to trying to make the entirety of the UK based capitalism unless you actually have a route to power. There's not too much point otherwise. The best people like me can do is just inform others of why it's a good idea, and that's what I do. Anyway, in the interest of not making this video 2 hours long, I'm going to be skipping large sections of this video at this point, because my god, there is some gold in this.
What I'm not saying is you all get together in your little communes and overbond, okay? So this is like individualist collectivism, right, as you might sort of call it. So this happened like for a lot of my life. It's like, we're going to become communists, we're going to become collectivists, and we're going to go to the land, and we're going to all read together on Thursday morning, right? That's like inward-looking, overbonded, fucked collectivism.
I love it, because from my perspective, that's basically what they're doing now. What Roger Hallam is effectively saying here is that there was a problem with the hippie movement in that it was all too inward-looking and too focused on people in the commune's self-interest. But from what I can see from all this Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion stuff, it's the same thing. People are doing this out of self-interest. They're effectively doing it to gain status within the movement. Effectively what they're all trying to do is say, look, I am the hardest collectivist here because I'm getting arrested for numerous things, for posting letters through doors when I'm on probation, or throwing paint all over Scotland Yard and getting away with it. Effectively, to put this crudely, penis measuring contest within the movement at the moment is just saying, look, I can do the biggest crime and either get away with it, or if they do end up going to prison, they can say, hey, look, I went to prison for 6 months, like, I'm harder than you. Like the two guys that blocked the Dartmouth Bridge, and I think they've ended up in jail for like 10 years or something. That is hugely status-seeking. That, it doesn't make them money, but they don't really care. They probably already have that sorted out via subsidies from their parents. Because people don't do this sort of thing if they've got things to lose. If they know for a fact they're going to have their life sorted out via being born into money, then why wouldn't they do this? This is what William Wilberforce did, except he actually did something useful and ended the transatlantic slave trade. And maybe it is fair enough that we do need people like this to actually think about social issues. The problem we have at the moment is that they're not doing it from, a Christian perspective, because that's what William Wilberforce did. He was an evangelical Christian, and upon creating the Clapham sect, their mission was to end slavery using purely Christian arguments, saying everyone is made equally, therefore if we're all made equally, no one should be under the complete and utter will of another person, unless obviously, you've committed a crime or something like that. The problem Roger Hallam has is that it's not actually too obvious what the climate is going to be doing in 50 or 100 years. The error bars are just massive. It's such a complex system that modelling it is nigh on impossible, and our best guesses are changing year to year. And this is why in the end you are just going to get nothing but status seekers. Why are people throwing tomatoes on paintings? The answer isn't because they genuinely think they're going to save the climate. The answer is because their life's so easy that they want to make it artificially difficult. That is the be-all and end-all of it. And back in the day, it was similar things. I've seen interviews of these hippies, and what they all basically complain about is that our parents, they seem to have this weird concept that the main part of their identity is their job, and I didn't want that, so I went off to go and have sex with strangers in a commune, because that's a way better way to live my life. And that's the thing. They didn't particularly do it, as Roger Hallam says, for any political ends. They did it because they were jealous of their parents, essentially. Felt like they probably couldn't live up to it, and so just disengaged. And as I say, the same thing is happening now.
In the peace movement, everyone decided we were going to become collectivist at the end of the peace movement. What that meant, basically, is people felt so intensely about each other. You'd be in a meeting, and two people would go upstairs to have sex with each other. They would, right? Because they thought they were so overbonded that the whole of activism collapsed, because everyone was so, stuck in a meeting to discuss, where the ketchup was going to go.
This reminds me of that socialists meeting of America or whatever it was, where they basically couldn't get anything done because people kept bringing up points of order of like misgendering and things like that. And yes, this is the exact same problem. And again, I don't get it. Like, Roger Hallam's made these problems for himself. Like, they think they have a victory every time the laws change, but then ultimately, I suppose you could argue that they've already won because we have a net zero target, and it's literally breaking the law if you try and make a plan that the High Court deems as not fitting in with the 2050 net zero promise. But again, that's not come about because of people like Roger Hallam. That's come about because of, the Labour Party and the Green Party, and absolutely filling the civil service to the brim with fresh out of university activists, to be quite honest with you. Which I suppose then you could say, well, that is then a success of Just Stop Oil, because as I say, they recruit a lot of people from university. So, well, I guess from the public-facing thing, yeah, that's not a good thing, but are they going to end up with their citizens' assemblies that they want? No, probably not, because those people in the civil service have the power and they're not going to want to give it up. If you end up with citizens' assemblies, I guarantee that, again, they are just going to be a front of democracy. It's going to be a load of local people saying, no, we don't want this, but the activists get in and say, well, sorry, you voted wrong, vote again until you get it right. Because that's what democracy appears to delve into. What are my examples? Look at literally every European Union vote. Honestly, we are lucky we didn't have to vote for Brexit again.
The collectivism that we're talking about here, the pro-social collectivism, is like communism or Christianity. Those are the two models.
Two of probably the most polar opposite things that I could think of ever. I have no doubt in my mind, though, that he is going to bring up that the original disciples ended up living in a bit of a commune, and therefore it was collectivist action. I don't know how he then squares a circle of these 12 disciples and went off to completely different regions of the planet to try and convert people. You know, they acted as missionaries completely individually, but I guess we'll find out.
I'm not saying we could become Christians or communists, right? But if you look at those two traditions, they were collectivist and they were outward facing, right?
I guess.
You know, on Saturday morning, they'd be with the workers, you know what I mean? They'd be writing letters to the Athenians, whatever they did.
Okay, those are two very different acts. I mean, again, if you're using the 12 disciples as an example of this is how we do political action, you're barking up the complete wrong tree. Yes, they did write letters to political leaders, sure, but that wasn't even necessarily to change the politics of the place. They didn't care for the politics. The point wasn't the politics of the area. The point was, Jesus Christ died for your sins. There's some basic commandments you need to follow. Really what matters is that you have faith in Jesus Christ and hear his teachings, and now go and spread the good word if you believe. They weren't saying to Constantine, you need to have a mass conversion of everyone, or you need to make a Christian nation. That's not what they said at all. They were literally just sending them effectively moral guidance, and of course spreading the word of Jesus Christ, of his death and resurrection. Going to the workers and demanding a revolution is completely different to that.
See what I mean? Guys, you've got to be Christian, right? You know, you might die, but never mind. You know, it's like you're outward facing. In other words, if you're going to be like pro-social collectivist, every Thursday night for the next 30 years, you need to go door knocking, right?
Yeah, so this is now Roger Hallam's new idea. Effectively, he needs disciples to go around and knock on doors and say, can I convert you to this cult? And naturally, when they say no, I imagine he's going to say, well, wipe the dust off your feet and move on to be a missionary somewhere else. Is there a reason he let his hair grow out and his beard grow like that? I don't know. Is he expecting to be raised up to the heavens for being the god of the climate?
So I want to have on a T-shirt is door knocking or fascism.
Oh my god, just give me fascism. In Rules for Radicals, one of the main points that Saul Alinsky makes is that you need to make your activism fun. And I'm not being funny, I've not done door knocking myself, but it doesn't look particularly fun. You go door knocking and you have people say, no, I am not interested in anything you've got to say. Or even worse, they say, you're just a climate cultist, please become more sensible. That's going to get depressing pretty quickly. And the reason that it worked with Christian missionaries is because they truly believed what they had to say and share. Because, you know, they saw Jesus resurrect from the dead. You know, they were actual witnesses to it. And I'm not being funny. If I literally see someone be raised from the dead, you're pretty damn right that I'm not going to get bored of telling people that, even if they don't believe me. But saying, oh, we need to door knock to let people know about climate change, it's like, do you really need to do that? It's on the BBC every day.
I mean, it's like, let's concretise it, right? You either fucking get out there and talk to people, or they're going to come and get you.
Yes, that is the only two options here. I'm not being funny, but I focus on Roger Hallam a lot and have an awful lot to say about him. He might be paranoid, but I just want to let you know, I'm not coming to get you, Roger Hallam. I just think you're an idiot.
Because they're all reading social media, right? You've got to go and door knock, you've got to go and create the assemblies. Not because, oh, it's just like a thing I'm doing in order to get something to happen. It's because it's the essence of who you are. You see what I mean? It is the plan to get out there and talk to ordinary people.
But at the start you were saying that that's a bad thing. Oh, I suppose he was saying that's a bad thing if you only do it on Thursdays. I think what he needs to actually say here is that when he says go door knocking, he means do it every day. You know, maybe have Sunday off for, you know, the day of church or whatever. But you need to effectively quit your job, leave everything on the ground and follow him, so to speak. I mean, It is quite telling that he's focusing more on the Christian side of things rather than the communist side of things, probably because Christianity is thankfully a bit more acceptable to say this is a good thing than communism to Roger Hallam, so I suppose I should be thankful for that. But yeah, to come away with the conclusion that what we've got to do is door knock, otherwise we're going to end up with Hitler, is frankly amazing.
If you haven't done that, we're done for, right? The only reason everyone's sitting here tonight is because some of us did 1,000 public meetings, right? That's how we built GSA, right? Grind, right? And you think, oh my God, what a big ask, Roger's asking all this stuff. That's how most people work, right?
If they manage to have a stable income from elsewhere or manage to inherit a massive amount of money, yes. Or literally, if they had so much money, they could literally just pay other people to set up the charity for them. Yes, that is how people would have thought in the past. You'll notice that they were all pretty bourgeoisie people, though. But being bourgeois is cringe, isn't it, Mr. I'm not a communist and totally just a Christian?
Before 1989, my dad went out leafleting every fucking weekend for 30 years for the Liberal Party.
Oh, he's only doing it on weekends? I thought it was cringe if you just do it part-time. I thought you needed to do it constantly all the time. And again, the only way you're actually going to get into that is, as I say, you start LARPing. Yeah, I'll give it a go, see if I like it. Or if I like it, I'll keep doing it. Like, this was the problem. Most bits of activism I've done, I don't particularly like. The ones I have liked, I've really enjoyed doing all the stuff we do for the Wellington Project, doing all the streams, spreading our opinions and our takes on books that we do and things like that. Yeah, I really enjoy doing it. I'd love to make it a job, but that's just not a reality at this point. If I could make that a full-time job, great, but Roger Hallam's kind of missing out on that point. Again, people aren't doing jobs or doing part-time activism because they don't really believe in the activism necessarily. They're doing it because they need to put food on the table, while at the same time believing what they're doing is a good thing. And yes, they would like to dedicate more time to it, but as I say, it's an impossibility when you've got a family to take care of.
It was brought up in World War II. You knew what would happen.
You really think your dad was spreading leaflets around in what, the 50s, 60s maybe? Because he was worried that fascism was actually going to be on the rise. I mean, don't get me wrong, I know before World War II you had Oswald Mosley, but he became so unpopular after World War II, it was unbelievable. I'm sorry, no, he was not leafleting because he was scared of the rise of fascism. He was spreading liberalism because he probably believed in their policies and somewhat preferred it to Labour and Tories' manifestos and policies. However, I have to say, it is pretty amazing that he was voting for the Liberal Party when his son has effectively become a full-on communist. I don't really get that. You just don't think of the Liberal Party and of growing up with the peace movement and becoming a hippie. I don't know. I might just be uneducated in Liberal Party position back in the early and mid-20th century, but it always seemed that Labour were the ones who were trying to appease and find peace no matter what. So I don't know, maybe I've learned something today.
When you are deciding, obviously you're not going to decide as an individual, are you now, as you know.
When you, the individual, are deciding, you're no longer deciding as an individual. What the hell do you mean, Roger? The only difference between individualism and collectivism that I can tell from your mind is that effectively one is a part-time LARP and the other is a full-time LARP. How that affects your decision-making as an individual, I have literally no idea.
But when you all decide, become collectivists as it were, then you need to decide to do this not because you're trying to be nice, right? Doing something because you're trying to be nice or ethical or moral isn't actually that valuable.
Goodness me. This is unironically pure communist Marxist drivel, by the way. Of course things have value if you do tangible action because you believe it's moral. And now whether that value is positive or negative, I mean, that entirely depends on the action you are currently taking part in, the reason you are doing that action, and of course the outcomes of it. But saying that you are only doing things because of your moral compass is not valuable at all, what an absolutely ridiculous thing to say.
People decide to do something like a fundamental change in how they operate because of deep metaphysical reasons. In other words, this is the way the world is. You realise you are part of a larger ideological project. In other words, there has to be a theory of society and a theory of life that is different to the capitalistic one, right?
I find it genuinely quite amazing that he has just said doing action because you think it's moral isn't of actually any value, despite the fact that he is literally up here moralising and effectively trying to shame people via this new moral code that he is giving them into actually doing something. It's almost like he's saying, ignore what your own morals are. What you have to do now is effectively listen to other people and just blindly follow. Because when it comes to collectivist, it's quite amazing. 1984 does this great with the 2-minute hate. Individually, Winston Smith doesn't even really know why he's shouting at Emmanuel Goldstein. He just knows that he needs to do it because everyone else is doing it, and if he doesn't do it, then Big Brother is watching him and he'll be put into room 101. And effectively what Roger Hallam is doing here is trying to say, right, we need to do this, but apply it to... I mean, he keeps bringing up Thatcherism, so effectively Margaret Thatcher and neoliberalism, which again, we've not had neoliberalism since at least 2008, and probably not even before that. It was effectively a 15 to 20 year long project, which actually did very well for Britain, but obviously Roger Hallam has to absolutely hate that, because it shows how socialism and communism are just awful when compared with more individualist ideologies such as neoliberalism. But again, as far as Roger Hallam's concerned, that is effectively fascism. But yeah, you'll notice how Roger Hallam, the man who is trying to save the planet from burning, isn't talking an awful lot about how people can actually do that beyond, please join my club and please follow what I say. Total cult. This is why I call them the climate cultists.
And we're not sure at the moment what that looks like.
Important point, literally never trust any political activist that can't give you a good idea of what their ideal society looks like, because that means they don't have a vision and they will make it up as they go along, and that's how you end up with a lot of people in gulags.
But if you think about the communists and the Christians, that's why they went out every weekend, right? They didn't go out every weekend because they wanted to be nice. They went out every weekend because that was their worldview.
I mean, again, I'm just going to ignore his things on communism. That's obviously just nonsense, but Christians went out every weekend? Are you kidding me? Missionaries made it their life's work. All the 12 original disciples, they went off to completely different areas of the world by themselves to spread the word of God, to spread the gospel, and a lot of them died for that. So putting missionaries' work down to, oh, they only went out every weekend, I mean, it's just a ridiculous thing to say. Again, he's trying to lessen the blow of what he actually wants, which is effectively, green socialism. I've read their books. I've read Extinction Rebellion's Handbook. You can see a video of me reviewing it on my channel. They have no idea of the economic reality. They just say we want citizens' assemblies and people can decide what they want to use their resources on there, as long as it's all green. Basically, yes, you are going to end up with one of... I mean, at least the Soviet Union tried to get trains running. They talk an awful lot about degrowth. All that basically means is your living standards are going to go down, because they are pretty well correlated.
So it's something along the lines of, shit's coming down the road, and this is going to create positivity because it will bring us all together to do great stuff to get ourselves out of this shit.
Yeah, that's just a lie though, isn't it? As I keep mentioning, he keeps saying, yeah, I don't know what the ideal society will look like. Okay, I'll choose fascism then. At least I know what that's going to look like, and at least I know the trains will run on time. Literally, if those are my only two choices, some vague green communism or British fascism, I'll take British fascism, thank you very much. Either way, I'm going to end up in some sort of work camp or prison, so it doesn't really matter, but at least fascism won't try and completely destroy the country.
So with Just Stop Oil, at the moment, this is what we're fumbling towards, right? Is a revolutionary orientation. So instead of asking the state, can you do this, if you don't mind, otherwise we'll sit in the road, we're going to be going, we're not asking you anymore because we want to get rid of you.
Yeah, again, this is just nonsense. As the ContraPoints thing is, these people don't want power. They don't really care for it. They just want to be in a position where they can perpetually criticise it and make money from it. That's all they want to do. And it keeps working. And the unfortunate reality of it is that an awful lot of them get away with it. Loads of them are not going to jail. Some of them are, don't get me wrong, and I'm happy when it happens. But there are people that have committed criminal damage. If it goes to a jury, the jury effectively will say, well... they believe that the world's ending, so this is actually a reasonable course of action. And it's like, look, we can't actually have the criminal justice system we have with juries if literally most people aren't reasonable anymore. Like, we seem to be in a mass hysterical society at this point where tearing down statues and causing criminal damage isn't being punished because the reasoning behind it is left-wing and on-brand. Absolutely crazy that we can actually have a system that allows for that.
Right? We want to get rid of the fucking system because the fucking system is never going to give us anything.
Apart from a promise for net zero, a complete ban on petrol and diesel cars, massive subsidies into green energy, carbon emissions that have been halved since its peak and are still going down, some neighbourhoods that are experimenting with low traffic or low car policy, and a Prime Minister that said this.
More protection for the natural environment than we've ever had, with a clear plan to deliver, and I can give the Honourable Lady my commitment that we will deliver on all those ambitions. We will deliver on what we said at COP, because we care deeply about passing our children an environment in better state than we found it ourselves.
Basically telling Roger Hallam's favourite MP, and she wrote some passages for the Extinction Rebellion handbook. Clearly they are in talks with each other relatively consistently, but literally here is Rishi Sunak telling the Green Party and all these climate cultists that yes, you have effectively got my ear and I will be putting in a lot of policy that you are begging for. This government is so in the climate cultist favour, it's unbelievable that they can even try and say that they are not doing what they want. But as I say, they don't care about winning power, they don't care about having power on their side, they just care about being in a position where they can perpetually complain about it, because effectively the whole thing's a grift. We are literally tearing the capability of British growth down simply because some old hippies decided that it's evil.
We're going to be ahead of the curve, like the communists were ahead of the curve and the Christians were.
Yes, I suppose we can argue that the communists were ahead of the curve on how to cause mass genocide. And again, his idea of the Christians being these rabid collectivists, again, they weren't political people. They wrote to political leaders, sure, but they weren't saying you are evil for having particular laws, and they certainly weren't saying you're evil if you industrialise. They were simply spreading the word of God, and if you take that to mean, well, we've got to be Christians, but, do the missionary side of things, however, do it for our own cultish behaviour, then you've missed the whole damn point of Christianity. But obviously his point isn't to become Christians, as he constantly says. His point is, you have got to believe in what we are saying to the point that the disciples of Christ did, so that you can spread the word in the same way. But, only do it on weekends. Right, let's finish off this last section.
So the last thing is about leadership. Now, everyone in this room, you're all feeling a bit stressed because you've got this guy rambling onto you, right? But if you're going to do this project, you all have to get up like me and become leaders, because there's massive forces to drag everyone back into that capitalistic individualism. You know what I mean? By Wednesday morning, you'll probably have forgotten about this and go, oh, yeah, maybe, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and again, I'm not being funny, but Roger Hallam wants that to happen. Because if he actually succeeds, then he's out of a job. And unfortunately, if he keeps actually encouraging more leaders, no doubt you'll find a better leader than Roger Hallam, because he's not a very good one. He is good at encouraging other people to do crazy things like smash windows and block roads, but doing actual useful things he's not very good at. He is an extension of the arm of leftism into the kind of hippie realm of people who don't really know what to do with their free time anymore, and so he says, well, do you want to feel good? Go block a road, when, in my opinion, they should be instead trying to go to church on Sundays and help out by actually, volunteering at charity shops or something like that. But they're not doing that because it's not fun, and Roger Hallam is quite good at making it feel fun. Because, it's fun to do something that's a little bit naughty. It's fun to be a bit of a revolutionary, isn't it? But it's the most, as I always say, the most pathetic looking revolution I've ever seen, and it's why I know it's not going to come to anything. And to be honest, it's part of the reason probably that police don't really put a lot of effort into actually trying to stop them, because the damage is minimal. All it really does is really annoy some white van men, and it's not worth, I guess, risking a scandal of harming an old lady or a young student over, blocking a road, when, in reality, I'm not saying this is fine. I'm giving you the police's perspective. Obviously, they should go out and arrest all these people breaking laws, but, you know, another issue is that we don't really have any prison space left, thanks to NIMBYism. Anyway, this is all going off piste. Let's see if he has any more things to say that are of note, and if not, well, that's the end of the video.
Some people go, you bring all these people together, and then you do this liberal routine of going, I'm not going to tell all of you what to think. You can decide yourselves what to think because I don't want to be oppressive. Everyone gets into breakout groups, and then everyone replicates the ideology of the system because there isn't a neutrality, right? Not influencing people just means they're going to replicate what they've heard on social media.
Again, I think that's the stupidest thing to say. Social media is absolutely brimmed to the hilt with all sorts of leftists saying that the world's on fire and it's going to kill everyone. I can barely go 2 days without seeing something absolutely ridiculous from a leftist, and I'm on right-wing Twitter. You know, I only really follow right-wingers. I don't think I follow a single left-winger at all, to be fair. But I see them all the time because they're all over Twitter. And whenever there is a Just Stop Oil piece in the news story or something like that, absolutely everywhere for a week, I will then see nothing but Just Stop Oil activists and ridiculous left-wing arguments for why the climate crisis is going to kill everyone. To say that the overarching zeitgeist on social media is individualist or anything like that is absolutely ridiculous. No, the problem, Roger, is that people don't really believe that this is all happening. That is the actual problem you have. They don't believe the story you've spun. And they have too much free time on their hands, and they just want to feel like they're either doing something useful or something a bit naughty. And you are their route to do that because you keep saying, look, you join me, you're going to be a revolutionary. And they keep basically getting nothing done by following you because the people getting things done are in the civil service and in politics and all that. So yeah, well done on that front, I suppose.
At the beginning of the assembly, you need to get up and say, I'm a fucking revolutionary, right? I believe in this. I believe in this. This is what we need to do. And now you are going to decide what you want to do, right? So it's a third way, right? So the individualist liberals are going, oh, you can do what you like, right? All the Leninists are saying, you've got to agree with me, otherwise I'm breaking your leg, right? The third way is to say, this is who I am. I'm authentic, right? Everyone in this room knows what I believe, right? This is what I believe. And you now have to decide what you're going to do.
Or is that not just doing what the Liberals did? Okay, you're not going to break their legs if you don't believe what he's going to say, but what if their authentic self is, you know, being a hyper-individualistic Liberal who likes a bit of your climate cultism? You know, he started this leadership bit by saying, oh, you know, there's this Liberal thing of letting you go off to your breakout groups and, you know, we have a general overarching goal, but you can effectively go to your breakout groups and decide what you're going to do. And then his reply to that is to say, oh, that's really cringe. What you need to say is, I believe this, I'm a revolutionary, and I'm going to go off in my own group and decide what I'm going to do. Yeah, I don't see how that's any different to what the Liberals were doing anyway. He's a weird guy, Roger Hallam, and as I say, you shouldn't take him seriously because he will say, it's bad if you let people go off in their own focus groups and decide for themselves what they're going to do, but what I want you to do is do the same thing. And I'm sure that will yield different results. I mean, honestly, as I say, there's about 5 or 6 people I keep seeing in all these Just Stop Oil stories. These are the true believers. And yet all their followers are constantly changing because the old age pensioners get bored of this stuff pretty quickly, but the people going through university, you know, they have a 3-year cycle. And, you know, at the end of it, they either need to move back to where they live with their parents or they get a job. But because you've got people constantly going into university, you've got a constant set of fresh faces that are happy to break the law because they just want a bit of fun. Anyway, that's about everything I'm going to go through with this talk. I found it rather amusing, and I hope you did too. Right, bit of shilling. Tomorrow we are doing a Tosh Talks, and Joz is putting together a whole bunch of research on Dominic Cummings' new startup party and his plans for politics in the future. We're hoping to have some decent insight into what the man who has been part of the system has to say about it as well, so please join us at 8 PM tomorrow for that. As far as I'm aware, Regional Variations is returning this week, and Saturday I will be having Laughing at the Guardian, and my god, I need to get some guests for that. So, that's everything I had for you today, so once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.